Right, today I am with Jillian Knipe and I'm really excited. Jillian is an Australian artist in London. She's also a podcaster with Art Fiction's podcast, and she's also an art writer. And I was fascinated scrolling through Instagram as you do and seeing her art and really noticing those layers and how she describes it on her website. These there's elements of confusion that where the image began, and it's to show the between the foreground and the backgrounds and interplay of it. And I really noticed that and thought it was very interesting and yeah, very lovely. So I'm really excited to have you on the show, Jillian.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much.
That's my pleasure. So I've read on your bio that your art practice brings stillness to the fractured process of perceiving what is present, a circumstance which is constantly in flux. And there's obviously more to this, but I really would love to hear more about that from you, what it exactly means.
I think it's about work that sits in the intersection of logic and imagination. So logic, I would think of in this instance, is the way that we might frame something. So for instance, we always come to any incident with our language, or the way we might explain something or categorize something, and the way we might impose structure as a way of communicating or holding something up. I mean, I always like to bring things back to a really grounded level with, our day-to-day existence and things that are familiar, like our body. So we'd be puddles of organs, for instance, if we didn't have a spine and a collection of bones to hold us upright. So structure in some way and logic belongs in that field, the way that we can describe. Whereas the imagination side of it is more a performative response that is more impulsive and like a connection, I suppose, between mind and body and materials that I'm working from, which is usually canvas and liquid acrylics and dry pigment. And I guess I'm interested in the possibility and the impossibility of the present moment, and that sort of fluidity that comes from the image being constantly, or the perception of the image rather, being constantly in flux. So for instance, when we're in a space, it's easy to say an art gallery because we're mainly talking about art, but it would be any circumstance. There's so many inputs that shape our perception, mainly through our minds and our bodies and the context in which we are present. So, things like our minds, like our rational thought or our memory that we may or may not be aware of, and our emotions. And it might be something that happened to us 5 minutes ago or 5 hours ago, and that will sort of create a framework through which we then perceive what we're looking at. And also our body, like the weather, the proximity we might have from an artwork, the time of day, the context in which we're even present, like are we hurried, are we slow, can we take the time? And so I guess I'm always trying to convey a sense of stillness in my work, like a moment, but it does come from, or it is inspired by, pretty much everything that is not still, because it can't be. I guess it's a paradoxical phenomena that we don't really understand what is present in any one moment. And I think that you're right. The work is very much in layers, and they're very purposeful. And I used to work in 2 layers, and at the moment I'm working 2 and 3 layers. So it's a bit like you know, when you use Photoshop or something and you can split all the layers of an image up and manipulate them, that's the concept of how it works. Not that I set out to do that, it just made sense to me that there is always something that's going on that we are detached from, and then there's our overlay that we bring, that is our perception to, say, looking at artwork. So it's almost like these layers could be pulled apart and reassembled, and each one has like a logical response or more of an impulsive response to them. Yeah.
Oh, that's really fascinating as well. I love how you described how all the different elements that we might experience in our lives, that we don't know what is actually like present right now, and it might have influenced, something might have influenced that happened 5 hours ago or something, and
Yeah.
yeah, and we're not aware of this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so when you create those layers, your creation process, is there something that you think about beforehand, or do you create it like intuitively? You start with one layer and then you know which layer comes after, or do you pre-plan it, or like how does it work for you?
It really depends on the work, and I work across series, and each of the series is kind of held together by a story, if you like. Although it's quite not as straightforward as a succinct story that you might find in a novel, for instance. So some of the paintings, for instance, will have me coming into the studio and just responding to the canvas, you know, just not really, could be outpouring something that I'm thinking about. So, for instance, one of my paintings started off with a letter to my dad after he'd just died, and I can't remember the actual title of it, to be honest, but it's called something like, in a letter that began, "Dear Dead Dad," I mentioned the oh, what was it? Something about rocks and water, and is a play on that game, you know, paper, scissors, rock. And we had, you know, like most people, we had a, you know, long and complicated relationship, and I wanted to kind of just respond to that immediately. And so I did, in this letter that became a repeated rhythm, a repeated pattern. And that's what I like to get to in the work. When I go into a sort of almost mindless pattern, I know that I'm in the right zone. I'm not using any kind of planning or idea. I'm not sort of enslaved to anything premeditated. And then once that layer is there, then I respond to that. So it sort of begins with the beginning, which sounds a bit odd, but there has to be a beginning. That's the great challenge. And then there will be some sort of, I guess normally there's some sort of overlay through the work, through which to view the work.
Right.
Yeah. So it kind of works in that sense, it works as like a shield from the insides of the work. It works like you know, like a peephole, the way that you would view something. It sort of magnifies what the image is, but it also controls your perception because you can't see everything. So it's sort of playing a game of hiding and revealing, of camouflage, and of showing you something, but not showing you everything. Yeah.
I guess the process of how your paintings kind of start to build, it must be like a really interesting and fascinating process as well, to kind of start with something and then respond from that, and kind of not know in that moment what it, before you respond to it, not know what it's going to be, and kind of like see a painting just emerge and show you what it wants to be. I don't know, I find that a really fascinating process.
Yeah, that's very much what it's like. I mean, one of my favorite painters is Bridget Riley, and the work of hers that I really, really admire is all her workings out drawings, where she'll be doing a drawing on graph paper and then she'll use gouache to fill in some of it, but not all of it. So it's quite unfinished. And I'm trying to move more and more towards that sort of partially finished painting, where the preparation and the processes are much more revealed. So each layer is much more showing itself. So from my most recent series, which is called Resilience, I'm doing a series of door paintings, which are actually taken from the dimensions of my front door. I've got a bit of a door obsession. And so whenever I'm traveling, I'm always taking photographs of doors and sort of slightly open doors. And I do like that as a sort of recurring formal image as well, throughout painting, throughout some of my favorite paintings. And in those paintings, the doors paintings, these are 3-layer paintings, and they begin with a drawing in inverted commas with gesso, so that I work in a flowing way to create almost like an illustration, like a preparatory illustration for a painting. And that sort of sets the scene for the next layer. And the next layer is where I lay the canvas on the ground in the studio, and I pour paint in, again, in a sort of rhythmic way. And I'm not really trying to control the paint. I'm trying to almost work against the preparatory drawing, because I try and pour the paint in a different direction to the direction of the drawing. And then that is then overlaid with a much more structured process, a much more structured image, which actually comes directly from Bridget Riley's painting called Fall, which she painted in 1963. And it's a series of black and white lines, and they come down the surface in a swirly kind of hair-like. I'm doing that with my body when I'm talking to you in a bit of a swirl. Whereas I've shifted that from the vertical to the horizontal and much more geometric. And because the work is about resilience, it's about a determination to move forward, to move away, to gain independence, and to survive. There's a whole sort of backstory to that. But that's another way of how it works. So in a sense, the fact that I'm doing 3 layers or 2 layers, or that I'm going to have this sort of organic element to the work and this very geometric logical part of the work, that is planned as far as I know that's what I'm setting out to do. But then that's as far as the planning goes, if you like. Yeah.
I like that. So it has some free flowing, like organic aspect to it, and then it goes into the more logical, more structured state as well, and the two combined is.
Yeah, it's the same thing as, perhaps quite simply, I'm sitting here having a discussion with you, and behind you is a plant, which we would think of as organic, and behind that is a door, which is part of an architectural structure. It's that same thing of trying to create an equilibrium, I suppose, of those different elements. Yeah.
Fantastic. Has it always been like that, or did this concept develop over time?
It really developed over time. I moved from Melbourne in Australia to London in the UK, and when I got here, just through sort of relocating myself and the difficulty and challenges with that, at a really basic level, not knowing where I was, you know, you can know where you are logically on a map or at a street address, but you do have this sense of disorientation when you move somewhere. I mean, everybody has, it's quite a normal thing. And so then I was painting lots of trees, and it was not, you know, the shrubbery of trees or leaves or anything like that. I was much more interested in the lower part of the tree, which is the trunk of the tree. And it's I mean, you often do things without knowing what you're doing or why you're doing them. Thank goodness, I say. But years later, I realized it was quite connected with Cézanne's trees. Cézanne painted a lot of trees or scenery where, again, I'm not really that interested in the foliage, but I'm interested in the way light seeps through between all the trunks of the trees in a forest. And I spent a lot of time in the mountains, and when you walk through the trees in the mountains, you get that flickering light that runs through all the trees, and quite, if you like, what's the word? It's a really vibrant, intense light because it's so narrowed down. But in this tiny little space, I think, you know, Lee Krasner is another artist that responded to that sort of thing. I think somewhere in that, Bridget Riley does a similar thing, but, you know, in a very different way. So, yeah, it was trees, 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 and very much, and always lots of color. I'm definitely a color related to the color-filled painters of art history, I'd say.
Yeah, fantastic. And like that feeling that you described of like logically knowing where you are, but on the other hand, not knowing. It's also like an abstract feeling, isn't it? It's like you can't sometimes, and that kind of
Yes,
like relates
yeah.
somewhere the abstraction of the work you're creating. I don't know. I just that came up for me as you were saying that. It's
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I saw a piece of work once called feeling, you are. And I thought it was such a great description because it's like that, you know, you don't really know where you are. And then after a while, I kind of settled into living in London. I went and studied fine art because I didn't have that background. And, you know, that's sort of 6 years of study. And my work became a different sort of figuring out, I suppose. And I eventually got to, I was working. I left university. I left art college. I was working as an art director and doing a lot of installations and working with sculpture and paper sculpture. And I felt my practice was really, really fragmented. So I wanted to come back to kind of a ground zero. And so I actually have a series of works called Ground Zero. And that was trying to work out, well, hang on, what am I dealing with? What is in the studio? What is this material called, you know, a canvas? What's it composed of? It's got edges, it's got sides, it's rectangular. And I started to respond literally just to the canvas itself. And then I would, you know, feel really restrained and restricted by that. It's too disciplined. And so I would do a painting that was just a impulsive pattern response, you know, with a finding a rhythm. So I would work the paint again and again and again and again till I found a rhythm. And then that rhythm, I would sew together the two paintings, you know, one of the structure and one of this kind of impulsive, colorful rhythm. They haven't made it to my website. I just remembered when I was talking to you now, so I must get them up. But yeah, that was about 2017. I then restarted and left my job and started a life of financial instability. Like everybody. Yeah.
yeah. But as you were talking about the rhythm, like it reminded me of earlier when you were talking about how you move the paint on the canvas, and it feels like the movement and almost like the finding a rhythm or the connection to the body, like to the paint as well, seems like something that is part of your work process from quite a long time ago, right? Is this how
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when you're just saying that, I remembered that in the studio last week, I was playing Kate Bush's song where I don't know if this is the title or just the lyrics, but it was the lyrics are "How We Move," and they're sort of repeated in that sort of witchy, brilliant way that Kate Bush does. And yeah, it's you know, I will often play music that I am working my body with the paintbrush or my fingers, or you know, I often, until I'm doing the logical part of the work, I'm not really using a paintbrush like you would use a paintbrush. You know, I'm often using a paintbrush held in my fist rather than, you know, with my fingers. I'm pouring paint, or I'm spreading it, or I'm getting out the hairdryer and blowing it around. You know, I'm not really. Yeah, it's only the logical structure that is painted, and then there's a kind of, I have to leave the painting then for a while and sort of touch it up and bring some sort of synergy to, or bring all those layers together. And so one of the things I've been playing with a lot recently is interference paint and glitter and metallic paints. And so that's really, really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds so much fun. Definitely. I can sense the fascination for the play part of it, to see like how what happens when I do this, and what happens when, you know, almost like allowing new things as well to emerge in the process of you creating things in a different way, not in like a conceived way or planned way, but really.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's really, I'm so thrown by how many times I go into the studio and have some sort of notion, not a plan, but a notion of, oh, this is kind of how this painting is going to work. And then it doesn't work out that way at all.
Yeah.
And I will look at the painting and think about what's going on in my mind or what's going on in my life, and it reveals something to me that I think, wow, I didn't realize I thought that, or I didn't realize that's how things were. Yeah, so it's often surprising.
Yeah, like a revealing aspect of it as well. I love that. And so you came to London and you studied in London. And what were you doing before? So what kind of made you do to create art, and what did you do before?
Oh, well, really quite different. So my first degree was in business economics, complete contrast. And well, surprisingly or not surprisingly, and I was only thinking about this actually in preparation for this podcast, because I'd listened back to a few of your episodes and people talked about, you've had some great guests and some great conversations, and people talked about how they came to their work and what they were good at and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, gosh, you know, during my first degree, I was really good at things that need a lot of intense logic, like computer programming, or, you know, setting up franchising models or something like that. And I was also really good at the absolute opposite end of the scale, which was the imagination stuff. So I remember doing projects on designing logos and product imagery and ads and stuff like that. And I was pretty good at that as well. I'm not sure I was that good at all the stuff in between, but yeah. So I did that, and then I wanted to work in something creative, and advertising was the most creative business thing I could think of. So I did that for about just over 10 years, and I loved it. I was an executive, and I was, you know, orchestrating these huge projects for clients. So I was working with production, I was working with creative people, and it was really, really exciting. I really enjoyed it until I got to, I guess, a senior level. And then it was a lot of, hobnobbing and planning, and it just took the wind out of my sails, really. I just became very disenchanted, and I just liked the work at a production level, really. And it was also a lot of that sort of, clever politics that people have to do. And I was adequate at it. And I just wasn't really that good at it. And I thought, I think I've reached the end of the road. And then my son was born, and then my daughter was born, and then we pretty much moved countries. And it was a brilliant opportunity then to do something it opened up all these possibilities that I'd never dreamed of, never even dared to dream of. It wasn't like, I grew up in a world where some people became artists. I didn't, nobody was an artist. I didn't know who are artists. What are they? It's so disconnected from my existence. And then I had the chance here to study part-time while the kids were little, and I was just so completely inspired by the art that I saw, and the sort of rich and troubled histories that I discovered in the UK and across Europe. And it's sort of depicted in art galleries and art collections and architecture and through the language. And I just thought it was brilliant. I'd come to London when I was in my early 20s, and I really felt like I'd arrived in a very complex world, and I really, really loved it. And I always wanted to come back. And when I was younger, I was always drawing and painting. I wasn't a hugely social person. I think I'm making up for it now, because anybody who knows me, whenever we have a conversation, says, "Oh, you don't know how to stop talking," and it's true. But yeah, I was always sort of pulling things apart and componentry to see how things worked. And I was writing short stories and poems as a teenager, and they're all terrible, and really dramatic. And even when I worked, I was doing improvisation, acting, I was doing drawing classes, and I studied psychology part-time. I was always, like, wanted to be really busy creatively and imaginatively. So it was always there. But in the circumstances that I grew up in, studying art was just not even vaguely a possibility. It's not like it was something discussed and negated. It was never on the table, even though it was so obvious that I lived and breathed everything creative,
Wow.
In fact, I remember at one point somebody saying to me for the first time, that saying of, "Oh, I'd rather watch grass grow." And, it's a sarcastic thing, like that would be boring. And I remember thinking as a kid, oh God, that would be really fascinating. Because that, I think for me, art really began with looking and seeing. And I am still very, very much connected to it to this day. And that comes through on my podcast, but it also comes through in my own practice. As much as I'm interested in the image, I'm interested in how we reach that image and how we perceive that image. So yeah, that looking and seeing is really pivotal to what my work's about.
Yes, absolutely. And I can very much almost relate to the enjoyment of looking and seeing. I can relate to that very much.
Yeah.
And so you were living and breathing art really, like from forever. And I think I just had that conversation with somebody who had a similar situation. They didn't realize they were had anything to do with art until, well, the studies were never something that was discussed neither, and the parents were wanting them to do something different, and so kind of like there was this, okay, let's do that, it probably is the better option, and an aspect of, okay, let's do that because for that person, right? And so not doing something for oneself, and it's happens a lot, or has happened a lot, I think, in the past, especially with the idea of that the world had of art not being something to take serious, not something that brings food on the table. And but then we can see how, like you and like the person I was talking to and other people, it always comes back because it's like a truth of yours, isn't it? It's like, how can you deny
Yeah,
that?
it is. Yeah, it is a really good way to describe it. I think that idea of a deep-seated personal truth. I do think that people are born with a certain aptitude and a certain way of functioning, be that sport or people in the media or acting or whatever it might be, and those things are either fostered or they lay dormant, and hopefully don't fizzle out to nothing. And now that we consider the world on a global scale, I think we're all very much more aware of what opportunities a lot of people don't have. But I think the thing of the sensible course in life, putting food on the table, etc., that is a completely realistic one. My dad had to leave school when he was just a teenager, to help pay for the family. And so, I don't come from any kind of, he didn't come from any kind of privilege or anything like that. And he instilled that in his kids, and we all had part-time jobs forever, and we hated them. And but we've all paid our own ways, and I suppose if I hadn't gone down that track, you can't, there's no alternative universe that you can compare where you're at or where you end up at. But for the study that I ended up doing and how I ended up working in advertising, I mean, that meant that I earned enough money to be able to afford to move to London and to study. So, I couldn't have done that otherwise. And I also met my lovely husband at university, so I can't regret that either.
Absolutely, no, and I think it's like when things come full circle, it's like, or when things they come to fruition when they're supposed to come to fruition, right? And everything that you've done on the path until you then were living and breathing art, and on a daily basis, until then, all of that will have added to everything where you are right now. So no, it's not about regrets or anything, but yeah, it's interesting just to see how it's like it's always there and one can't deny it. Eventually it's like pushing to come out. But
yeah, and I also believe that everybody is naturally creative. It doesn't mean that everybody is an artist or a born artist, but I think some people are actually, and that can be diverted into all sorts of areas. You don't have to become an artist, but it's in a way it's about resourcefulness. It's about because you choose a certain hairstyle, a certain hair color, you choose what jewelry you wear, what outfit you wear. This is all creative thinking. When somebody says I'm not creative, I think, well, you couldn't function. Well, how would you decide what to eat?
right. Absolutely.
So yeah, so I find all that really interesting and very inspiring. Yeah.
Yes. No, yeah, you said it wonderfully there. Like when somebody says I am not creative, then how do you choose things? Because it's energy. No, I love that. And thank you so much. Before we finish, I just wanted to ask you one more thing. Like if you think of the listeners right now and listening to you, and you know, they might be wanting to create themselves, but might not feel at the moment that they are feeling that leap of faith, or whatever it is. Maybe they think I'm not creative. And looking back on your life, like, what would be one piece of wisdom that you would love to share with
well, there'd probably be about 50 things, and preferably with a bottle of red wine and some nice cheese. That's a proper conversation.
Yes.
But I think no advice in a way is good advice. I think that you have to create your own advice, because everybody's path is really unique. And when we have conversations like this with you, I sound really together, but you know, I've been a bumbling neurotic mess along the way the whole time, like everybody else, because we do that. We judge other people with our insides by their outsides, you know. So, and especially in social media, everybody seems so much more accomplished than we all are on a day-to-day basis. So I think there is space for trusting your instincts. And I mean, I guess one way I would think about it now, which maybe I think would have helped me, I'm not sure, would be to go through a period and accept a period of not having a plan, not having a goal, not trying for an outcome, you know, doing drawings, not seeking to put them on social media, not trying to do a drawing, just trying to understand what you're about. And then when the time is right, to actually develop a plan rather than meandering endlessly, because that can get quite frustrating. You'll go off in all sorts of directions and never quite finish anything. So I think that trying to balance that mix of no plan and a plan, a very cunning plan.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's some great advice or piece of wisdom to share. And I love what you shared as well before that, about, you know, not comparing our insides to somebody's outsides. I think that's something really important, because, you know, the comparison that people do is something that's huge right now with the internet and everything, and it can help people to hold back, not to share more, or to feel that they are smaller or whatever. And yeah, so that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing both of that, and for the whole conversation. I really enjoyed it. It was like really enjoyable to listen to you and to ask you those questions. And I think it's fascinating, the work you do, and your thought processes and everything. Like very fun to speak to you.
Well, Maria Katharina Richters, I am so pleased with today. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yes, it's a long one, but yes, you have done.
Yeah, it's been really magical. It's been an absolute delight, and I really enjoyed the podcast. So all the best to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.